do these quarterly, give or take, and my intent is to do, like always, one this morning from 10 to about 11:30, or as long as you want to go, and then another one this evening from 6:30 to about 8. Fortunately, I have a good team with me. I got Jeff, who is the head of our Rec and Parks. I got Doug here that can talk all DPW, roads, and all that kind of fun stuff. I got my boss over here, the chief administrator, Roberta Wyndham. And I got a slew over here, but especially our superintendent of schools in Carroll County for public schools. There's a lot to talk about, and what I want to do is get what's on your mind sooner rather than later. I'm going to highlight a few things that are on my mind first, and then really just start opening it up. If I can share with you what's on my mind when it comes to safety, security, growth and development, and quality of life. And if we look from the south to the north, Highway 32 coming out of Howard County is now a 2-lane road. Howard County put a lot of money and partnered with the state. So you have a 2-lane road coming up into Carroll County. You have the Readiness Center, which is now, and I'm very proud to say, the Major General Linda Singh National Guard Readiness Center. She is the first female or first woman adjutant general for Maryland, and she's also a very good friend. They'll be doing a ribbon cutting later in October. Keep going north, we have the 3226 intersection. And let's see, if you keep going north past that intersection, you got really good Peruvian chicken on the right, okay? And a little strip mall with a dental office, Caldwell Bank. I mean, that really grew pretty quick. Truist Bank is on that corner. Keep going north. Bennett Road, Johnsville intersection with 32 is complete and is safe, which is a really good thing, and that took quite some time to get done. We'll hold off on the right or the east for just a minute, going down Progress into the Bennett Road or Beatty property. We'll talk about that in a second. You go back down to 26, make, well, if you're coming southbound, make a right. So you're going 26 towards the west. You have Liberty Exchange, which has, you know, Basta Pasta, the Korean place, really, really good Indian food. If anybody likes Indian food, that place is awesome. The microbrewery in the back, 1623, which also just expanded, another 8,000 square feet. Believe it or not, that property, Liberty Exchange, is about 80 to 90% occupied. There's a few places up front that aren't. We're going to get there. But it's 85, probably 90% occupied. Okay, so that's a little bit of the development. The two residential developments that we're going to talk a little bit more about, and I brought the developers with us today, are the Zabel property, which is in the south, between Ridge Road and Marriottsville, that corner, that whole Booper's Farm, that's the Zabel property, and we'll talk about the residential piece that's going to be going in there from Elm Street Developers. And then to the north, across 26, you got Georgetown. Georgetown, with that horrible hairpin turn, is going to end up being a circle for safety. And then it's going to feed into what's called the Beatty property, which is a large, you know, farming area or farm area. And that's going to be a mixed-use piece of property developed by St. John's. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as far as the industrial use, the over 55, and what single-family homes we should expect in that parcel. Those two pieces do have a residential impact that concern a lot of folks when it comes to safety, security, our fire, and EMS, and also our school capacity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Safety and security. I'm so proud of my colleagues and I establishing a fire EMS. We put together a professional fire EMS that I think had a price tag of about $18 million this past fiscal year. That's a large amount of money. You got to realize we deal with about $500 million as far as our operational budget, give or take. I know Ted's here somewhere, right? Am I close? Okay. Yeah, close. But the key there is this is ongoing money, and this is very important to understand what are the things that we want to accomplish this year, next year, over the next 5 years, while we have a finite amount of money coming in, revenue, to the amount of money that we're pushing out. That's the balancing act that we play as commissioners. That's why it's so important that we have these town halls. I need to understand your priorities so then I can go back to my colleagues and say, this is the important stuff that we're looking at down here in the southern part of the county, but also countywide. Unfortunately, the litmus test often that we see is what's on social media. Value is there with social media, but I'll share with you that there are challenges with social media because there's not the give and take, and there's not the conversation that we're going to have. It's going to be the text, it's going to be, you know, the folks that are just what's on their mind right away, and they let it go. I will share with you a few of the comments that I've seen on social media. One is that myself or colleagues, as we're voted in, we only represent one portion of the county. That's absolutely not true. High priorities for me are North Carroll High School, Charles Carroll Community Center, Mount Airy as it's going to develop. Down here, of course, in the designated growth areas, specifically with the Zabel and Beatty property, and fire EMS, or for example, some of the pieces that I'm really focused on. Trying to think, there are a couple other social media stuff. No, I can't think of anything right now. But just be aware, with social media, if you see something, always feel free to reach out to me. I will get you the answers. I will navigate you to the right place, whether it's reaching out to Roberta, or it's reaching out to our head of schools, whether it's the Board of Education President, Kenny Kyler over here, or Cindy McCabe. Typically, it's both of them at the same time. That's who I reach out to get the answers that you deserve. There was questions on planning and zoning, how things come about, how do decisions, how they're made when somebody wants to build on a piece of property. We have appropriately defined our zoning: residential, commercial, industrial, what are called employment campuses. You can think of that as being a blend. And then agricultural and conservation we're finishing right now. It goes through a process, and I have flow charts on when somebody wants to build on any one of these properties, how it fits, and how the decisions are made, how it goes to the Planning and Zoning Committee, how it goes through permitting and all that kind of fun stuff. So you can definitely have one of those anytime you want, and I'll put them off to the side in a second. Another question that kept coming up, especially when we started talking about the schools, and this is very important to me, the redistricting. And I don't hide away from some of these words, but it definitely kind of puts the hair on the back of the neck stand up a little bit. Redistricting is very important. In order to get the right blend across the entire county. Now, we called it the South Area or Southern Area Redistricting Committee, but the focus is how do we look at if potential is there for redistricting here to support the entire county. And I'm going to get into that in just a second, but one of the comments that was made had to deal with what's called impact fees. And I have the head of our management and budget to talk a little bit more about impact fees, but I have a fact sheet on how impact fees are applied and how they're not applied. Some really, really good suggestions are coming out, but sometimes the suggestions aren't able to take place because it's not the way we apply impact fees. The easiest way to think about impact fees is they have to apply across the entire county's needs. So if there's a need down here in South Carroll or South County, and we have the ability to support those needs in another part of the county, that has to be looked at first before we're looking at impact fees for the southern part of the county. I'm going to jump right into the school redistricting. And again, I'm very proud of our CCPS leadership that's over here, along with the Board of Education, for identifying the need to look at redistricting. I always believe you put something on the table, and then if it sticks, keep it on the table. If it doesn't stick, take it off and let's move forward from there. But the redistricting stayed with us for a few years. A document came out about 84, 85 pages, and I'm very proud that the community was a part of looking at the problem and then coming up with viable solutions and options on how to solve that problem. And they came up with 3 or 4 viable options and solutions to a problem of potential overcrowding here in the southern part of the county, and the impact that could have on the rest of the county, especially with the residential developments that are taking place. I had the opportunity to be a part of a couple of workshops to review that 85-page document, which is available to you. And it's got great maps on it, it's got great discussion points. And I was able to be on the workshops, and the answer came out is, let's keep the momentum in looking at this, but let's not make a decision. Now that wasn't mine, that was really up to the Board of Education and CCPS at the end of the day, to keep the momentum going, but don't make a decision right now that will have impact on our students in the next calendar year. In other words, in 23-24. It doesn't mean that things are not happening. It just means take, the foot off the decision making while you're keeping your foot down on the understanding what the problem is and other viable options and solutions. What else do I want to talk about? Because I do want to open this up. Yeah, let's just open it up and let's just build from there. We have an hour and a half, and what I want to do is kind of throw out some of the questions. Okay, actually, one more thing that's, I think, important. We attend a meeting, a conference in the summer and the spring, or summer and the winter, called MACo, the Maryland Association of Counties. And the Maryland Association of Counties is where all the jurisdictions, all the counties plus Baltimore City come together, and we talk about what legislation should take place between January and April when the state legislation goes down to the Capitol. The conferences allow us to talk to the administration, but also allows us to talk to our peers about what's good happening in our community, what's not so good happening in our community, what are some of the best practices. We had a great opportunity to talk to, as we always do, to the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Ports, and highlighted to him the importance, especially down here, of continuing the development of 32, 26, and every year and every time I see him, I talk to him and the State Highway about how do we get rid of these suicide lanes on 26. Because as we know, we have seniors living along 26, and we feed right into 3 high schools with Liberty Century in South Carroll, right on 26. So you got elderly driving and you got young drivers. The two don't mix very well when you have no medians and people going into the suicide lanes making left-hand turns. So I'd like to see some medians put in place to cause people to make the appropriate right turn and then appropriately turn back. It may take 30 seconds more of travel, but it'll be a whole lot safer. Did talk about Nels Acres, as I always do, by the reservoir, and that's still a priority to me, and talking to State Highway. We talked about the other highways as well in the county, 97, 140, and the rest. Then had a meeting with Secretary Owings, George Owings. This is really exciting for me as a veteran. The second veterans home is going to be built here in Carroll County, more specifically in Sykesville on Slacks Ave, just past the American Legion, if you know where the therapeutic riding is, not therapeutic, but the horse barn is, right across the street. And that's pretty exciting. It's a $165 million effort, and probably going to get close to $200 million because of the cost of steel and other things. It'll have about 148, 150 beds for assisted living for our veterans. None of it's being paid from county dollars. 35% being funded from the state, 65% being funded from federal government, and if it's up to me, is the workforce will come from Carroll County. So we're talking to Carroll County Community College and saying, hey, this is the type of workforce they're going to be looking for. Let's start building that workforce now. The secretary showed me the timeline, or showed us the timeline, looking at breaking ground in 23 and opening doors in 26. That's exciting, you know. It'll be the second home here in Maryland, and taking care of our veterans here in Carroll County. The third meeting I had was with Secretary Gill, Mike Gill, who is the Secretary of Commerce. And we talked about some of the growth that's happening in Carroll County as a whole. Here in this area specifically, again in Sykesville on right across from Freedom Park, Ronsdale? Not Ronsdale.
Buttercup?
No. Well, Buttercup goes this way. What goes this way? Huh? No, not it. Raincliff. Raincliff, Buttercup. Okay. If you go on Raincliff, you'll see right now, it's pretty large right now, and it's an industrial piece of property that's being built. Partnership with them is very important because looking at walkways, getting onto Freedom. So how do we build the economic growth here in Carroll County, but do it right, that's going to serve our community? And that's a great example of how we're going to do that. It was a good meeting, and Secretary Gill is very impressed on how we are using the appropriate properties here in Carroll County without exploiting them too much, where we just drain ourselves. And it does lead into the one piece of property, and that's the Beatty property, and I do have St. John's with me. I'll have them talking in a few minutes about the mixed use, how they're looking at the industrial piece of it, the over 55, and then the single family homes. And it's all of that combined on how to best and most efficiently use the property known as the Beatty property. And then Elm Street just walked in as well, and they're going to talk about the Zabel property. The largest concern I have about the Zabel property is the infrastructure capacity on Marrittsville 2, and what would feed then in onto Ridge Road. So how they're conforming to what we want them to do, and it took some work for them and us to come together to lessen the density, but still make best use of that property. And they're going to talk to you also about their timelines. I will say the school year started off awesome. And, you know, if you don't know, when a bus stops and puts out that stop sign, there are cameras. So it behooves you to stop when you see a stop sign. If you're in a 4-lane road without a median, that means everybody stops when you see that stop sign. And I guarantee you, we're already picking up tickets, 1-time, 2-time violators of those stop signs. This is all about safety for our kids. It's not about dinging you or us as drivers, but it's how do we build a culture where we are ensuring that our children are safe getting on and off those buses. But that's what we deal with. And let's see. Okay, now let me open it up. What's on your mind? The first person's usually shy, but that's okay. Okay.
Circle back to redistricting.
Yeah.
You said there's a potential for overcrowding in the schools. I thought there was overcrowding currently.
Right.
In some schools and under capacity and others. And if that's the case, why are we kicking the can down the road probably 2 to 3 years before we do anything? That would be my estimate based on feasibility studies and then another year, a year of feasibility study, a year of, you know, let's make it best, to get a committee, make some more decisions.
Right.
Decide not to do anything again, and the problem just continues to grow as the development continues to grow.
No, understood. And just for the good of the group, when I hear a question, I'm going to try to repeat it if I think there's value in repeating it as far as the sound. And that has to do with why are we kicking redistricting down the road? If we believe that there's overcapacity or capacity at one point and undercapacity at another point, why not make decisions now as opposed to kicking things down the road is the gist of the question. And why don't I, either Cindy or John, either one.
Thank you, that's a great question. I will begin to answer and then Mr. O'Neill may want to add to it. But I'll start off by saying that when we look at redistricting, there's a lot that's involved in it besides just the enrollment numbers at each school. And so while we've looked at that and the enrollment numbers and we've looked at where we could move students and we've come up with some different options, there's some more work to be done right now to add to the information that we already have. One bit of information we need is we need feasibility studies for 2 of the schools that we're looking at perhaps adding additions to. Those would be Freedom Elementary and Sykesville Middle School. And so we need to get an idea of if it would be feasible to add on to those schools, and if we could, what would the cost be, and how would that affect which students we would ultimately have to move to other schools? Because as you can imagine, we try as best we can to keep communities together. That's another thing we look at, not just enrollment. And then the other piece that we're working with right now is funding. We have, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kerwin committee that was in the process of passing legislation in the State House called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. And that's new legislation that affects all of the public schools in the state of Maryland. And right now, it's becoming more clear what those mandates are going to be and what the funding will look like, but we haven't gotten certain answers there yet. And so what we don't want to do is make a decision to redistrict or to have an addition put on a school, and then we get new information that comes down from Blueprint, and it makes us undo the decisions that we just did. So we're trying to get some final answers on the the financial obligations and of Blueprint before we move forward. John, you want to add anything to that?
It's up to you.
I guess the only thing I would try to add to explain the additions and why pause for maybe another year is that when Superintendent McKay mentioned the blueprint, one of the things that we know all Maryland school systems are going to have to do, whether we would want to or not, is implement full-day pre-K over the course of a series of years. And so when we look at the Freedom site especially, the question then became, if there's the possibility that we want to try to tie redistricting, moving kids with some construction, and we know we're going to have to build classrooms to implement full day pre-K. We don't have space really in any of the pre-K sites to do that. Whereas in the past we might have said, or Board of Ed could have said, well, you know, we don't want to look at redistricting along with construction. Now we're going to be forced to look at construction whether we want to or not because of pre-K. So let's see what we can do at the Freedom site as the starting point. If you're familiar with that site, it's a very small footprint of land. It's right off of 32. There's a lot of things there, but people like me or any of us can speculate what we think could happen, but the only way to know for sure what we can build there is to have the architects and engineers determine that. And so questions like, can we put pre-K at Freedom or not? And if we can, could we put a couple of additional classrooms at Freedom at the same time? And maybe there's some efficiencies of cost to be gained from doing some construction that would try to find the middle ground. So there would still be some redistricting, and there will still be people who maybe do not like that because they didn't think that their student was going to move ever. And then there's going to be what we call the domino effect. So this is just very hypothetical. You can download the full report that the commissioner referred to and kind of look at some of the options if you want. But suddenly if this student from Freedom is coming to Linton Springs, and because that student's coming to Linton Springs, now my student is leaving Linton Springs to go to maybe Mechanicsville. Before we do all of that, if there is now this clear question of construction, let's get all of those answers and know for sure what we can or can't build, and then come back to it just a year from now and make the decision with a much more broader, deeper understanding of what the actual possibilities are, and then move forward. And I would argue respectfully that the first time we delayed it was because of the pandemic. In the first year of the pandemic, our enrollment numbers, which was pretty normal across the state, dropped by, I think it was about 700 students. And there was a similar drop in most other counties in Maryland. And so we really wanted to take a pause and see where that enrollment dropped and what it was going to mean in years 2 or 3 of the pandemic. Our enrollment is bouncing back really well, and so the Board of Ed decided to get the process underway again, and this is where we landed. The feasibility studies were approved to go out to bid. I would anticipate that bid would return to the Board of Ed. My best guess would be December. It's possible it could be November. It's possible it could be January, and we would have those results roughly in April or May, and the Board of Ed can make new decisions in that time period. So I guess it's a question, and I understand that there's different viewpoints on all of this. It's a question of, is it worth, I guess, a year, to be fair, to know as much as you can and then make final decisions, or just to make decisions on redistricting now and fill in the blanks on construction later, is kind of where it fell out after those 2 work sessions that the commissioner referred to.
It's a great question. 3 things. The goalposts keep moving, and we don't know where the goalposts are going to actually land with the blueprint. Money doesn't solve everything. And again, there's only so much revenue coming in. So how do we allocate the revenue from the county to solve whatever issues, again, that community life, that quality of life that we're expecting? And then 3 is when we move our community around, our students, when you just, and again, hypothetical, because we're not saying moving this child or this student from this place to this place, but once you start moving from Linton Springs to Mechanicsville, you're now moving into a different feeder system, up to Westminster. Everybody loves freedom, okay? I have not found one parent that has come to me and said they don't like Freedom. I mean, and I don't think I've found a parent that says they don't like any of the elementary schools, but it sure seems like Freedom is, they don't want their kids leaving Freedom. But once you start moving out of a feeder system, so from Freedom to Linton, that's one thing. But if you start moving Freedom up to Mechanicsville, now you're looking at a different feeder. So it's those three things. It's the goalposts haven't been set in the ground yet, and that's that blueprint that you were talking about. So we got to get those goalposts set in the ground, get some cement around them, understand what that blueprint actually is going to mean. Understanding that capital projects don't solve all the things that we think they could solve. And then third is what is best for our students, as opposed to moving from one elementary school to another. And oh, by the way, they're going to pass by a middle school that they could be going to get to a third or to a second. So, yes, ma'am.
I personally appreciate all the research that's going in, especially the Freedom. I worked in that building for 14 years. I have grandchildren in that school, so I'm well aware of the building. Like you said, it doesn't have a lot of land around it, doesn't really lend itself. But I personally appreciate that this is what we look into. I also worked at Freedom when another redistricting was done. The kids were going to be moved to a neighboring school, which was part of the same feeder system and had an excellent reputation. There were parents who talked to me and were so upset they pulled their kids to put in private school because they weren't going to put up with it. So I know the school system is going to get a lot of that because parents are parents, you know, and like you said, people love Freedom, they probably love Eldersburg, and they probably love, they don't want their child there. But there's having a vested interest in Freedom. I appreciate the fact that this is going to be done. As I said, I've got 2 grandchildren there now, you know, and I'm concerned about, yeah, they're having a great experience, so I can't complain.
No, I agree. And people love Freedom because you were there. I mean, people love Freedom because, really, it's because of the talent and the administration and the teachers. And really the embracing that Freedom has. I mean, but you're right, whether it's Eldersburg, Carrolltown, Piney, Linton Springs, they all feel that way because it's a community that goes into that school. You know, there's no lie. Let's keep our churches and our schools intact. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Couple things. One, my kids in Freedom, we love it, of course. But the very idea of building at Freedom, I don't see how that's possible at all. There's very little land, the parking is completely inadequate. I mean, the land that isn't built on now, they use. So where are you going to put more classrooms? I have no idea. I mean, that's up to the architect, but I just don't see it. And the other thing is with redistricting, I love that you're looking at the possibility of building on schools, but part of the redistricting, they're looking at busing kids so far away. I mean, it's almost, it's not really right to be busing kids so far from home, especially little kids. I mean, I understand that in parts of the county, the rural parts of the county, kids have riding the bus for a long time, but it doesn't seem right to be busing kids so far from home when their school's so close.
I don't disagree. And I don't think we have to repeat that question or comments. And you said it very well. Freedom has 9 acres of property. And there's very little space. I think it's 9, a little over 9. Very little space for additions. But like I said, building isn't necessarily the solution. You know, but we have to look at potentially a hybrid of another, you know, not classroom, annex or piece, whatever we call them. That's why we're taking that step back to take 2 steps forward, in all honesty, is because capital projects cannot solve just this problem. And you're right, some of the options, and if you look at that, I'm telling you, take a look at this report. I'm very proud of the community's input into this. And you're absolutely right that students with some of these options would pass schools to get to other schools, and it would break apart communities. So these are all things that are being looked at. But hold on a second. John?
That's a great question, and The answer is it's possible. There's 2 relocatable buildings there. One's a quad, I think, of 4 classrooms, and the other's a double. So there's potentially a footprint there that could be made permanent. There's also the possibility of building more up rather than out. And I'm not saying that I believe any of those things can be done, but that's why you do the study, just to know that. So you could be right that the study would say you can't build anything at Freedom. And then that would answer another important question, which is Freedom could even be a pre-K site under the blueprint, and then we move on. But if you were to look at the report that the commissioner keeps referencing, the committee ultimately came up with 3 of many different options that they earnestly explored. 3 options they kind of presented to the Board of Ed. 2 included some additions, and they weren't just at Freedom or at Sykesville. And 1 that did not, and the one that did not include capital additions had the most movement of students. The reason to do the additions would be, I guess, if we have to do some construction under the blueprint anyway, could we gain something by doubling up? And then secondly, if you do the capital additions, then ultimately you move fewer students further. And all of this merits more exploration and understanding, but on one hand, you could say, well, building things costs money, and that's absolutely true. On the other hand, moving students further on buses also costs more money than is currently in the Board of Ed's operating bus. It's a more complicated formula than this, but we pay our bus contractors by hour and by mile. So the further you go, the longer you go, that increases that cost a little bit. So, I hope I'm probably sounding defensive. I'm not trying to be, but if you could know more of all of these answers and make the best possible decision and have as much community buy-in as possible, and I think that's where we would like to land. And if the feasibility study answers questions just to say you can't build at Freedom, then the community has that answer and they know that, and hopefully some people, maybe that's something that can help them live with whatever the outcome turns out to be.
Yeah, and actually not defensive, but thorough. And that's why we're doing what I believe, and again, I'm using the holistic we, it's they. Really, it's the CCPS and Board of Education packaging this best and moving forward. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I prepared some stuff. I'm PTA president, Honey Ranch, and I, yes, please have a seat. Yeah, I'll give you the microphone. Yeah, they give me the microphone.
Oh, yikes. So I'm the PTA president at Piney, an excellent school. Every single school in the Southern District is amazing, and I don't want to be redistricted from Piney, even to Freedom. And I had the pleasure to serve on the Southern Area Redistricting Committee, the subcommittee, and we were handed a problem. The problem was fix overcrowding. At first, it's just a giant math problem, right? There's a total number of seats in the county, and that number is larger than the current student body. And so we got to move the boundary lines, evenly distribute the students, right? Easy math problem. I like math. Anyway, the issue is the number of empty seats in the county are not geographically located in the county's designated growth area. So once you start moving the students out of Carrolltown, which is stuck in the corner, you can't send them to the east because there's a body of water there. You can't send them to the south, that's a different county. You can't send them to Freedom. So you got to move them, and then it creates this waterfall effect, the domino falls, and so it goes. The Southern area school system is saturated, and there's currently no room for growth in our Southern area schools. Sorry. No one in the Southern District wants their children bused to Westminster. No one wants to increase bus times at increased costs, right? And initially, I thought the answer was developer impact fees. Okay, we've got developer impact fees. They enable local governments to collect revenue from the builders for public facilities necessitated by new residential or commercial development. Okay, great. Let's get some money. Let's not charge the taxpayers for this development. I don't know, maybe
understanding that the county commissioners have not collected impact fees for our schools since 2012. And I understand that there's been population fluctuations, but at this moment, I think that impact fees they're intended to mitigate the impact of a given development. All the development is happening in the southern area. So I hear you when you say capital improvements are not necessarily the solution, but again, this is a giant math problem that also involves geography. So that needs to be taken into account. The problem was created by development. The solution perhaps can include investment in the southern area. I understand that in different counties, impact fees are collected for transportation, schools, public safety, the library. I have a list. And I hear you when you say that they're difficult to spend, and my charge to you is change the rules. Talk to the fellow commissioners, see what you can do. We're all paying our taxes. We're all paying our taxes. We deserve to have schools that are not, it's not, I don't know. It's okay. And
No, it's working.
sorry. But, you know, again, the southern area is the designated growth area, and that is being impactful to our students here in the southern area. So I charge you with, think about impact development fees to mitigate the issue, and then also responsible growth. Perhaps the designated growth area needs to be looked at and moved to a different area of the county, because there are seats available in Tawnytown, in Manchester. We don't need all this development here in the southern district. So, right.
Honestly, I hope you would get an applause. You said it, no, you said it very well. And apologize with what's going on with the mic. I am going to hand it over to Ted, Director of Management and Budget, to further explain how impact fees are being used in the county and how we derive the solution and how we define our impact fees. Because you're right on a lot of the things you said. First off, Piney is awesome, and Sam went there, and Superintendent McCabe was principal there, so we do also have a love for Piney, along with all the other elementary schools. It is a concern about, and you know this, you squeeze the balloon on one end, and how's it going to turn and have that domino effect, when just looking at kids and not building and not capital. What is the blend going to be? But as far as impact fees and how they're used today, and I'll take that charge that you provide in talking to Ted and my colleagues about how impact fees can and what are some of the other opportunities to look at them. The idea that, and recently, I think it was July or August, when was it, where we decided to go to zero again. Yeah, and the idea that we can't go back and change it, we can. From the board, we don't have to wait to the budget to go back and change how we're going to now apply impact fees or bring in impact fees. As far as the designated growth area, it was determined, and I inherited that from the Freedom Plan. What I think that's going really well right now in looking forward, and then I am going to hand it to Ted, is we are finally at a point that we are defining our zoning with agriculture and conservation, just finishing up. But we finalized the industrial and commercial and residential, which is very, very important. We are doing an economic study right now that's being outsourced to then move into what's called a master plan. And that master plan is going to take place, well, as soon as this is done, with the intent of it being done in 2025, yeah, I was going to say 25, 26, to then let us move. Things don't move on a dime. And it's not because it's government, it's because the effects of the entire county. So, but great question about how to use resources is what it comes down to, regardless of where they come from. How to use resources to fix the problem. But specifically, Ted, why don't you talk about impact fees? Because I'm getting a lot of questions about that.
Okay, impact fees are almost always misunderstood. People say, look, that's happening, it's having an impact, you have impact fees, so use the money. The problem is, it's not as easy as that, as free as that. There are legal constraints on what we can do here. First, you mentioned other counties have other impact fees. That's true. And Carroll could. We've looked at other options from time to time. One of these legal things we talk about, though, is there's this idea that there has to be what they call a rational nexus between development and the effect on services before you can have an impact fee at all. Then when you set it, how many dollars are you going to collect? You have the same idea again. You can't just say, oh, we're going to make this $20,000 per residence. You have to be able to demonstrate how much an impact there's going to be and how much you're going to collect. Which takes us now to the ones we do have. We have a parks impact fee and we have a school impact fee. We've had both of those for a very long time. There have been times when that brought in a significant amount of revenue. Not as much today, even putting aside we set it at zero, because we don't have development happening at the same level that we once did. Now I know some of you are saying, well, there's too much development, and I'm not trying to get into that argument. I'm just saying there was a time when we had 1,200, 1,400, 1,700 permits a year. Now we're talking about moving at about 300, it might have hit 400 this year. So it's very different in terms of how much money it brings in. Now, school impact fee, we have it at zero. Again, you're saying, I see an impact, you should be collecting an impact fee. Impact fees, the use of impact fees are driven by an idea that you're providing the same level of service to a larger population as you grow. So same level of service, and there's a lot of ways you can look at this, but if you think about how many seats do we need to fit all the students that are coming in, if you were able to do it with 5 schools before, but now you have growth, that leads to the need for a 6th school, impact fees might be eligible for that use. Our population is not growing. Our school enrollment is not growing. What you have in South Carroll is a local phenomenon, not a school system-wide phenomenon. And on where do we collect and where do we spend? For impact fees, the boundaries of Carroll County are our impact fee zone. We collect within that area, we spend within that area. So a dollar that comes from South Carroll is not necessarily going to be spent in South Carroll. A dollar collected in Tawnytown is not necessarily going to be spent in Tawnytown. Now back to setting it at zero. Right now, I don't believe that we can justify collecting toward the idea of using this to provide the same level of service because the county is growing, because we're not growing. Another of the problems we face, and sometimes people say, okay, well, even if you believe that, why not collect it now? You're going to need it someday. The problem is we can't collect it without a plan to do something with it. And again, this comes down to legal constraints. This is not about a law. This is about case law. A developer could say, wait a second, you have no plan to spend this money. You should not be making me pay an impact fee. And if you went to court and they said, what's your plan? And you say, well, we don't have one, you're probably lost. And they're not going to take our side on that. Now, we could collect it and give it back at some point. And again, this is not a law, but case law precedents lead us to say 6 years is a reasonable amount of time. You can collect for 6 years without spending it. But if if you don't have a plan after that, then you need to get it back. Administrative nightmare. We don't want to collect money and then have to find out who gave it to us, where are they now, can we even find them? So if we don't have a plan to spend it, the best thing for us to do is not collect it in the first place. So there's a lot more to talk about. The more you talk, the more complicated it gets. I hope that at least helps you understand it's not as easy as just saying, well, we have an impact, collect the money.
Can you just, if you wouldn't mind, could you further expand upon the comment made earlier by Commissioner Rothstein that impact fees can only be collected if there is a need to build countywide? So I know that the state mandate is, we as a state, the state legislation is, the state will not assist with funding for new construction of a school unless there's need throughout the whole county, as we've been talking about all morning. But is there a prohibition on the county collecting impact fees for the same reason? In other words, if you were to make a plan that the growth area, the designated growth area, needs a new school, and you make that plan, now you can collect the impact fees, correct? It doesn't have to be that the plan is rooted in the need for schools in South Carroll only because there's room in North Carroll. Does that make sense?
Yes, and again, it gets complicated, but I think an easy answer is, when you look at using impact fees, it is much like looking at the state decision process for funding schools when there's capacity. And that's another concern here. Even if we thought we could use impact fees, or we come up with other money to fund these schools, under the current circumstances, I think extremely unlikely the state is going to participate in these projects, which means we'd be fully funding this with county tax dollars. Years ago, in a somewhat similar situation, we built a Manchester Valley High School, almost $70 million project with all county money because the state said, you have capacity, you don't need this school. The state would say the same thing here. They would say, you have capacity. Now, whether you think that's a good solution or not is really not the point. It's just that the state is going to say, we're not going to participate. So back to impact fees. It basically is the same thing. If you can't demonstrate, if you don't have a solution for redistricting when you have capacity, it's hard to argue that it's an appropriate use of impact fees. But I want to go back to something I said earlier. Even put aside that, right now, we don't have a growing student enrollment. It'd be very difficult to argue that there's a need for more buildings because of a growing student population. Again, what we have is a population growth in one part of the county. And it doesn't get us to impact fees. And I know it's not the answer you want, but we don't always get to do exactly what we want. Yes.
Thank you. So I have a question about whether you have any thoughts you wish to share with us or plans regarding an increase to revenue. So my understanding is that with the, sorry, I'm too soft. Okay, is with the blueprint plan that's being kind of put on us by the state, with that does come a lot of cost. And you guys, I think you've done a great job explaining impact fees. That was one of my questions. But whether there's, other ways to generate revenue, we're going to be issuing tickets when people blow through bus stop signs, that's one way. I mean, I know our property taxes, I think, seem to be increasing, or they're phasing in some increases. I don't love paying more in taxes, but aside from increasing taxes, are there other revenue streams the county's considering?
So, other ways to bring revenue into the county is just a question. And tickets are not the way to bring revenue into the county. Money from traffic stops and tickets and all that does not go to the county. So all those sheriff stops for speeding, those funds do not go to the county. Blown by stop signs, that is not revenue into the county. The large revenue, continuing revenue into the county are taxes. property and income taxes. Some municipalities have sales tax, but county property and income tax. We have not raised our taxes in the last 14 years, give or take. Closer to 20 years. And at that point, yeah, we lowered it by 3 cents. I am not saying we are going to raise taxes. I am not saying that now. What I am saying is you have this much in expenses and this much revenue coming in. We just built a fire EMS by law to establish a professional fire EMS, which is a pretty large chunk of change. We want to provide the best we can to our schools and the school system, to our sheriff's department, to all of those what are called non-discretionary dollars that we must spend dollars towards. Then we have what's called discretionary, or if we want to or not want to. Some of the things that are discretionary you really want to do, like a landfill. You really want to have a landfill, okay? You don't have to, but it would be a really good idea. And also ensuring that the landfill is not full, and that we have options on how to deal with, with that. So it comes down to revenue. What revenue do we want to bring in? My colleagues and I will be talking through multiple work sessions, starting probably in January and really getting into depth in February, March, to talk about expenditures, what we're spending our money on, and revenue we're bringing in. Taxes will be put on the table, because I'll put them on the table. I always believe putting everything on the table, and if it makes sense, keep it there, if not, take it off. I'm not saying that's where we want to go, but we'd be kidding ourselves if we would not look at what revenue comes in. Now, we were fortunate with the pandemic in the sense that we received one-time dollars or funds in 2 very large tranches of money from the federal government. The pandemic showed us that we have a very specific need for broadband, especially in the northwest corner of our county. So we applied about $18 million to expand our broadband, to assure students that if they couldn't get to the classroom, can get virtually network internet. We're also able to use some of that revenue for infrastructure, some roads. We're also able to use it for our health care, for protective gear and stuff. Very defined on how we're able to use that one-time amount of money. But the ongoing money that really we're talking about is revenue coming in, is taxes. There's another tax bill recognition, but don't want to confuse the issue. Income tax and property tax are the 2 largest as far as revenue coming into the county. It will be discussed, and we'll see where it goes. The fortunate thing is I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues, to develop this budget. By law, that is the one thing that we must do, and that is have a budget by May 31st to start the next fiscal year by 1 July. That's by law. So that works, those works, and they're all public. They're all open for you. And this company is very important. And the same thing on that?
And so Commissioner Rothstein was right on the revenues. I just want to tighten this up a little bit for you so you walk out understanding. The property tax is our largest revenue. It's about 60% of our operating budget. Income tax is our second largest revenue, more than 30%. The 2 of them combined, actually I understated that somewhere there. The 2 of those revenues are 90% of the operating budget. Correctly identified recordation as the 3rd biggest revenue, but much, much smaller. So if you talk about getting more revenue, it is all about property tax and income tax. And there's nothing magic we can do to make them just create more. People say, well, wait a second, what about economic development? And we have good things happening in economic development for Carroll County. You know, we don't develop like Howard County or Anne Arundel or Howard. But just for context, we have a $40 million economic development project, which for Carroll County is a pretty big project. That creates $400,000 a year of revenue. That's good, it adds to the revenue, but that doesn't move the needle by itself. You need a lot of stuff to happen. And we already have all that built in, our expectations are built into our revenue projections. So if you want more money, what it comes down to is property tax rates have to go up or income tax rates have to go up. There is no other way. Property tax is totally in the commissioner's discretion. Income tax has a state cap of 3.2%. We're currently at 3.03%, so there is room for the commissioners to act there. But commissioners don't get a lot of people yelling at them, please raise my taxes. So it's tough.
I have a question for you, sir.
One second. Go ahead.
I have a question regarding, you were talking about the money that the state got from the pandemic fund, so to speak.
Yeah.
All, as you know, all municipalities, counties, cities got a fund and an amount contribution. So how much do you think is left in what we, the county, have approximately, and are there plans for that amount of dollars? Thoughts amongst the commissioners to spend that balance?
No, great question. It has to do with the amount of funds that we received from government, from federal government, from the pandemic. The last tranche of dollars that we received for the county was about $34 million, somewhere in that range. Reaching out to our staff, staying in the 4 categories that it needs to be spent in, it was about $57 million of needs. So we had to take a look at that $57 million in needs and apply $34 million. So that money's spent. $18 million of that did go to broadband. Behavioral health got a significant amount. But there was much more requirements that were brought into us than there was money available. Now, I am also proud that with the 8 municipalities, we reached out to them because they also received some dollars. And we said, okay, if you want a project, how can we possibly partner with you on a project where you're paying some and we'll pay some? Westminster, for a good example, dealing with a water project. They put in some and we put in some for a water project. Great partnership doing things like that. But yeah, the requirements far outweighed the money coming in.
But I mean, is there still some money left in the money you got?
All the money is allocated at this point. It's not executed, but it's already been allocated.
And the reason I believe that, I don't know, taxpayers.
No, it's all good.
But, we just hear in the national news all the time, state news, oh, this money went out and it's not being spent, or somebody took it, or, I'm not suggesting that at all, I'm just saying, if there is money left, hopefully there is some, spend it wisely, whatever, compared to some places we hear that have sort of lost the money.
And the idea, and great question, is make sure we spend our money wisely. And I guess putting it in context, like Ted would say, you have what's called operational dollars or ongoing dollars, let's leave it at that, and one-time use. This is one-time use dollars. So you could apply some of that into ongoing and spread it out, but it's very difficult. You really want to use the one-time dollars for one-time use. And that's what we're doing with that $32 million. Of $57 million requirements, all of that $32 million has been allocated, and actually we're spending it right now. We have till 2027?
December of 26.
December 26 to have all of that money executed. But it's, like you said, it's all math.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, Rich. Go ahead.
What's the status of the Hobie Wolf property development on William Road, which is in your district for elementary school and I'm a
The best.
He's also a great
Harry. You got the latest, or who has the latest? Was it you on Hobie Wolf? I always get confused. I apologize. The question is, what's the latest on the Hobie Wolf property? And I was going back and forth.
I believe plans have been submitted, but they're very.
Yeah, yeah, Hobie Wolf off of Oklahoma.
It was 103 single-family homes.
And yeah, I just want to verify, plans have been submitted, and that's where it is right now. It hasn't, it's in concept at this point. It hasn't gone any further.
Is that further along than Beatty and Zabel?
Yes.
Yeah, oh yeah. But it's in concept, it has to go through certain steps. It goes to planning and zoning at that point. I have that flow chart to show.
I'm familiar
Okay.
with the flow chart.
Yeah, so that's where it is right now. The question that I was having was, is it over 55 or not? And it's not.
It's not.
It's not, I know.
So.
I thought it was.
I mean,
It feeds into Freedom.
yeah.
I-
So we have 615 students and capacity for 500, I believe.
It's,
And Linton Springs, I have heard now, is up to 775.
That's correct.
And their capacity is 705.
okay. You're good questions. I want to make sure I got the right numbers.
And I'd like to know when the
With
new
Linton Springs?
enrollment numbers will be available from the school system. And I hope it's not in June of this coming year, which I think is when a report goes out on the website.
Okay, and that's why I do want to ask them for the current enrollment and the numbers. But you're right. That is the concern. Now, it goes through the process. Things will not go through planning and zoning if it cannot meet the needs of, if the schools cannot meet the needs of the property. And I've been a part of holding up development because of that. Can't hold it up indefinitely, but you can definitely hold it up. If the infrastructure, if fire EMS, if the schools, it's a checklist, cannot support that development. But
For the evening town hall, you might want to include Hobie Wolf.
Yeah,
Talking
okay.
also about
No,
Beatty and Zabel, because
that's good.
another
Yeah,
major
yeah.
large
No, you're right. No, good call. So, yeah, go ahead, John.
We have the enrollment projections here, so Mike will tell me in a second what Lynn's enrollment
We can't hear.
I don't know what.
Say it. Talk louder.
Want me to walk over there and shout?
Just shout in there.
Just shout
Yeah.
from here? Okay, I'll shout from here. Any better? Okay. There were some questions about enrollments at certain schools and then enrollments in general. So the time each year when we get our current year enrollment is September 30, and that's a state thing. So on September 30 of every school year, every school system in Maryland has to send an enrollment count to the Maryland State Department of Education. And then there's some back and forth where they filter out, how shall I say this? The state uses enrollment for funding purposes. So that they turn it into a funding formula. So they turn in an actual head count of students into what they call an FTE or full-time equivalency that they fund based on. And so this, wherever Ted is, it's always more confusing than it should be. So there's a head count of students, and then there's the number we get funded on, and sometimes we use those numbers, and maybe people use those numbers interchangeably. But the enrollments go to the state in September 30 from every county. There's some back and forth with the state where they wash out, where they clean up those numbers based on their needs. And usually, I would say by late November, we get our final, here's your approved, authorized, or whatever the right term is, certified enrollment figure. So that's for a given year. Our enrollment projections, which we're required to do annually, as is every school system, and those have to be certified by the State Department of Planning, are produced by May, and they become, where you can find them if you want to do a couple of clicks on the internet is they're housed in a document that we call our Educational Facilities Master Plan. That's on our website, or if any of you really want to see them, you can give us a call and we'll make sure you get them. And those projections are a 10-year look at where we think enrollment's going to be over time. We went through a period of declining enrollment from about, for about a decade, going back to I think 05 up to fiscal year 15. Just before the pandemic, we had seen a couple of years of flat enrollment statistically, and then 1 year of positive change in enrollment. Pandemic came, and I think our enrollment went down somewhere around 750 students. It bounced back to about half of that in the first year. And just anecdotally, without any of that paperwork being done with the state, it appears that our enrollment is back to sort of the pre-pandemic level now. So it seems like from a student enrollment lens, we've recovered more or less, or at least statistically, from the pandemic. So that's kind of where enrollment is.
You got a number?
When will September 30 numbers
What's the number?
be public to anybody? Either our
722 is what we're projecting for this year.
So Mr. Kyler, board president, asked me when can the public know? So we guard that a little bit because if we start saying, here's what our September 30 enrollment numbers are, and then the state disagrees with that, you have to sort of backtrack and explain that. So normally we wait until we get our certified approval from the state. Usually that's by the end of November. Sometimes it's been a little earlier than that. Sometimes it's been in December, but that's when we feel very comfortable saying, you know, this is what our enrollment number is. That also includes the number they use to fund our schools.
And for Linton Springs, it's 722. So, what's that?
No, it's higher.
I don't know, he's projected,
I'm running, I'm on the Spirit Committee, I promise you I bagged 775 things for
okay,
students.
projected is 722. If it is for this year. So, we'll,
Yeah, that's the number that was projected last year for the
for
current
this year, right.
The whole conversation about September 30 and when the state certifies is when we have the
You'll have the
official
right
number
numbers.
for the next year.
But we promise, it's at 775 right now.
Okay.
Yeah, the projections, I think, were pretty off for that school, and it just concerns me that other schools in the southern area may be
Okay.
having the same kind of growth. So
yeah.
the problem's perhaps even worse than you think.
No, and I appreciate, and the statement was not a question, but it's that the concern that the projections are off from last year to this year. And it's important that, you know, that homework is done right because of all the ripple effects that we're going to have. So I appreciate it. Rich?
I have a question for Ted.
Go ahead. Rich, what's up? What's your question?
Ted had mentioned sources of revenue for the county. One of them being recordation tax as well as transfer tax. What's the feasibility of increasing recordation tax? What's the upside of doing it and the downside?
Well, it's small to start with. I mean, it's not going to, like Ted says, move the needle, but go ahead.
Yeah, first on transfer tax, Carroll County does not have the authority from the state to have a transfer tax at all. We do have a recordation tax that's totally discretionary for the commissioners. They can put that at any rate that they want. You know, on the relative size, if we were to double it, that would add maybe $15 million a year, which is obviously noticeable. But with all the things we're talking about, it's not going to be a solution to all that we're concerned about.
Yes.
You said doubling. The current rate is now $10 per thousand, am I right?
Yes. I'm not suggesting we
Can't
would.
imagine going to 20.
Oh, no, I
Right.
absolutely agree. I'm just saying, even if you did,
All right.
it's not a big enough
Right.
thing. And right now, we might not be the highest rate, but we're among the highest as it stands.
And Frederick County is up there, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a good question, is how to look at the different revenue resource coming in to make difference, to allow for us to do the things we want to do. Recordation is one of them, but even, like you said, doubling, it would be significant, but it still wouldn't get us to where we want to go. But it's definitely something of, you know, good question. I already talked to you. Go ahead.
I have questions. One is pretty quick, so I don't know if, I think it should be.
The answer is 3.
I'm a Lincoln Springs mom.
Okay.
And so what I'm wondering is the state providing any funding for the blueprint? Like, are we getting money to provide these classrooms? Because I feel like they should, if they're going to have this legislation.
give us something to work with. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two is if the feasibility studies are done for redistricting, I'm Presidential Park, we're looking at going into an entirely different community. A couple of you got my letter, I'm a Girl Scout troop leader, I coach softball down here in Freedom, and I run the Spirit Committee at Linton Springs Elementary. So I really don't want to leave my community, and I don't think they want me to either. But what I want to know is if the feasibility studies come back and we can't build at Freedom, we can't build at Sykesville, are we immediately busing our kids an hour away, or are we going back to the drawing board? Because I feel like that's not an acceptable answer. I really don't think for 1,000 kids. And I guess that's the bottom line.
No, it's
the first one's the blueprint.
it's a great question, and I think you know, there's not going to be an immediate response when, you know, with the feasibility study. A lot of work still has to be done, and to ensure community has their say in what makes sense. But no, this decision, I think it was at your last board meeting, you said you're going to do a feasibility study, right, Kenny? So the feasibility study has not kicked off yet. It has been decided on. But the first question was about the blueprint. Yeah, good question.
Great question. Actually, there's a lot of great questions here. So the question about will the state fund pre-K, the answer is we think and hope so. So admittedly, we've talked pretty openly about this at a lot of our meetings, and if you go back and watch hundreds of hours of tape where you can see this conversation. Admittedly, there was a disconnect early on at the state level, at least in my opinion, between the policy part of the blueprint, programs for kids, requirements for teacher compensation, et cetera, and what the capital impact of some of those policy decisions will be. I feel like last year in the General Assembly, the state sort of caught up to itself. They're just like locally, there's an operating budget and a capital budget at the state. There's an operating budget and a capital budget, and there's a couple of offices that oversee school construction. The General Assembly did pass some legislation that mandated that it's called the Interagency Commission on School Construction, we call it the IAC, that mandated that the IAC take a look this year at making sure that their funding formulas for what they participate in, they call it eligible construction costs, includes blueprint-related items, and that includes pre-K. So hopefully within another fiscal year, the state will be participating in some of those pre-K construction costs. The other question was
feasibility study.
The feasibility studies. So if the answer is you can't build anything in Freedom, or you can only build pre-K, then I don't think it's back to the beginning or back to the drawing board. That's a nice piece of information.
May I have your attention, please? There is a SUV running on the parking lot. It has retired Navy RN 3012. A running car.
It's registered
on the
nurse.
parking lot, SUV.
RN is registered nurse.
Navy.
So I don't think it's back to the drawing board. It answers the question of could we have pre-K there or not. It answers the question of could we also have other classrooms built there. If the answer is a hard no, then the baseline of work is all still there. And yeah, it will need to be updated a year later. Technologically, where we are as a county and a Board of Ed today in terms of geocoded family and student information and planning parcel maps, it's some work, but our team and our committee can redo that work and kind of go forward from there. And so you would go forward and say, okay, that's not an option in Freedom. There were still other additions as part of the plan. You know, let's take a look at this whole thing and decide about how to move forward, and the Board of Ed will have that option to do it. There was a question about, I think you might have said, would that mean we would just start busing kids immediately? No, I don't think the Board of Ed would ever do that, and under any redistricting scenario, even if it didn't include the concept of construction. When the Board of Ed would vote on, based on its own procedures or policies for timelines for redistricting, if they vote in the fall of any year, the earliest ever that they would make those changes would be the subsequent year. But the Board of Ed has full authority to decide when any change or part of a change is implemented. So they could say, they have a full range to say whatever. We want to do that at least 1 year out, at least 2 years out, or when we do that, we want to consider grandfathering certain kids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing beyond their authority.
Mr. Neal, there's also an appeal process.
There is, and I think anytime any Board of Ed in Maryland has ever redistricted comprehensively, there's often an appeal from the community. Redistricting is one of the categories in state education law where if there is an appeal from the community, all appeals to boards of ed go to the State Board of Ed. But in the instance of redistricting, the State Board of Ed mandatorily assigns that appeal to an evidentiary hearing. So they assign it to something called the State Office of Administrative Hearings, and there's it looks like a tiny little courtroom kind of a setting where we present our case and the appellants present theirs, and then a recommendation is written for the State Board to consider. So it's a very formal process and an involved process.
Sure. You know, the overall takeaway from this is when somebody says it's not my responsibility, you know, like from the Board of County Commissioners, it is, and it's all about partnership. It's our responsibility with the Board of Education, with the CCPS, and with you, because we gotta do this right, and it's very, very difficult in making change. But I will not hold on to saying, well, oh, that's just the superintendent's decision, so just send it to her or to the Board of Ed. I'll help navigate, you know, those questions to those that can make certain decisions. But this type of process, you better believe it takes all of us, you know, to make this thing happen. The roads have to be appropriately done to allow the busing, the contracting.
There is a running SUV on the parking lot. It's been running all morning. It says
It'll
retired
run out of gas.
Navy.
I think it will solve itself eventually. So, what I'd like to do is transition for a couple minutes. Two very large projects happening in the southern part of the county that are affecting the concerns about schools and infrastructure and all the things, you know, here in the southern part. One is what's called the Zabel property, which is south of Ridge Road and west of Marrittsville 2. And then the other is the Beatty property, which is north of 26 and east of 32. Like in Bennett, that whole area is a large area for the Beatty property. The developers have been working very closely with me and the team on what right looks like. But most importantly, they need to work with you. And you have a say before a shovel goes in the ground on how to best look at this property and say, this is what right looks like, and this is how it blends into the community where it's safe, it's secure, it's good for everyone, and the quality of life, you know, stays. Again, not easy questions to answer at all times, but it's all of us working together. They are working themselves through the process, and the way they work themselves through the process is being here today and getting your input to then take away and say, okay, here's the concerns. This is what we're going to look at in solving some of these issues. So why don't we start with the Zabel property first and give just an overview of what we're doing. I'll be your Vanna White, don't worry about it. You get this and I'll take this. Yep.
Thank you for this opportunity. And again, my name is Jason Van Kirk. I'm with Elm Street Development and presented here back earlier this year at the town hall with the same board here. At the time it was concept, we hadn't submitted it yet to the county. At this point in time, we've submitted this concept plan to the county. We received comments back. We've gone to our review committee meeting in July timeframe, and we'll presented those comments. And subsequent to that meeting, we finalized our traffic impact study, and we've submitted that to the county. That traffic impact study is probably the biggest piece of this at this point in time, in order to ultimately defining the road layout that's going to be decided upon for this project. That's currently still under review by the county staff, and we expect to get comments back on that traffic impact study in the next couple of weeks. The really big thing, this is 143 lots shown here. So, you know, as Ed alluded to, we had started out looking to rezone this to R20,000, and through the comprehensive zoning process, it remained at R40,000 in conservation, and it has been historically. That's where we end up with the 143 units, as opposed to something, you know, closer to double of that number if it had been an R20,000 zoning designation. And so the biggest question, and Commissioner, you alluded to it, is that of the road network. And what we have proposed from our traffic study is that there's a planned major street that was on the Freedom Plan. That Freedom Plan was also contemplating this as an R20,000 development. And so, you know, we have a question as to whether that planned major street is still a meaningful needed improvement given the reduced density and given the functioning capability of the intersections now. And so the traffic impact studies looks at all the intersections you see on this map, but also probably about a 10 or a dozen more that are in the surrounding area. And they're all functioning at acceptable levels of service now, as well as into the future. And we project that by utilizing projects that we know are in the pipeline, but then also applying a growth rate to the traffic into the future. And you do a 3% growth rate year over year into the future. And all those intersections are functioning appropriately into the future as well. And so that's where we come down with the concern as to the disruption to the environmental resources on this site, as well as the disruption to the existing homeowners that live out there, both on the south side of the site here off Prothero Road and on the north side of the site at Ridge Road and Shailen Drive. There would be a significant amount of disruption if this becomes a through street. That also then tends to try to pull more traffic to Marriottsville Road number 2. Marriottsville Road number 2 is a functioning road, but it's a windy road that goes down to kind of the Howard County line that a lot of people use to commute on the back roads. And I'm personally not of an opinion that we should be trying to funnel necessarily more traffic in that direction versus letting it, you know, coexist as it does now and continue forward through the future. And so
I'm of the opinion we should not be funneling more vehicles down
Marriottsville too, because it's going to be very difficult to make any changes to Marriottsville too. So that's a big concern.
That's correct. And so we have proposed in our concept plan that we would provide paper street connections should there at any point in time be a kind of change in the way the zoning's done in this area, the way densities, future density happens in this area, which isn't on the table at this point in time. But if that changed in the future, the county would have the ability to make the connection to Prothero down here, as well as to make the connection to the Marriottsville Road number 2. But at this time, what we're proposing to them is paper streets where they get the right of way and they have the ability to do that in the future. But that our entrances would be limited to the 2 entrances along Ridge Road, and then a small number of houses being accessed off of Lazy Morning and with no connection point between those sides of the community. And that's really where we stand today. I wish I had more info from a feedback standpoint on what comments we're getting on the traffic impact study. But subsequent to that, depending on where we are going there, this is the main issue that we want to resolve before we respond to all of our comments, because it kind of flows through everything in terms of open space calculations and road frontages and stormwater designs and all of those things. And so that's really where we stand today. Yes?
So I have two questions, Ken. Can you explain a little bit more about Paper Street? Most people here don't speak the language.
Sure.
Okay. Obviously, it's on paper, but you can explain that better. And secondly, then, these larger lots down the bottom right, where would they access their properties from again?
So, okay, first on the Paper Street question, that is, every street is on a plat and has a right-of-way drawn on the paper. It's a Mylar, but that is what kind of defines what the area is and what it's being used for. Just like your single-family lot has a plat and it has its meets and bounds. And so when I use the term Paper Street is that the plat will show the right-of-way and have that area available to the county and owned by the county. But it doesn't get built initially because the need can't be demonstrated, and so it is only on paper as opposed to in the physical world. To your second question about the access of houses, are you talking about in this neighborhood over here?
Well, you said down the bottom.
Down at the bottom here?
Yeah, how do those people access their property?
So there is a temporary cul-de-sac at the end of Lazy Morning that comes right up to the property line. It has grading easements around it so it can be removed and the street extended into the disabled property. That's how this kind of property developed. They left that in place, ready for that point. And so what we're proposing is that we then take this cul-de-sac out, we extend it up into the disabled property a certain distance for a total of 14 houses, 12 houses off of that street.
And that comes out from Marysville Road too?
Yes, that ends up coming to Forest Hill Drive, and then Forest Hill Drive goes to Marysville Road number 2.
So you're saying they're larger lots, so how much more are neighbors?
So this area down here is the conservation ground.
Yeah.
And so those are 1 acre lots is the cluster provision for conservation ground. And so
Yeah, 12 there, is
there's 5 that are conservation, and then there are 7 that are R40,000. And the R40,000 clusters down to 20,000. So the size of the rest of the lots that you're seeing are at least 20,000. Some of them get a little bit over based on where they're located and how they're shaped and that sort of thing.
There's 12. I have one more. And who determines, let's go back to the paper lot thing again. Who determines that if indeed someday, selfishly I hope it doesn't, because we live in that area, but who determines to say whether or not those become reality access points as opposed to paper lots? Does the county do that?
I mean, that's a great question, and I think it also is part of how, whether we get to the point of having it constructed in this manner or whether we go in a different manner, that one, staff is looking at traffic impact study, and they have the ability to make some calls on that as well. At this point in time, if need be, it would go to Planning Commission.
No, it's a great question, and again, it's about the partnership, getting the right.
Right. So, good morning, everybody. Doug Brown, Deputy Director of Public Works. One of the bureaus that I work with is the Bureau of Engineering. Traffic impact studies and traffic in general comes through our Bureau of Engineering, where we will view the developer's proposal, and upon that, then we will develop our recommendations based on what we know, and that will also come from what has been overlaid in any specific area in the past. And one thing that we're very cognizant of here in this area of the county is that we hear all the time from folks about 26 and 32 and not having the ability oftentimes to go east, west, north, or south through other areas of the county. You know, so because nothing connects, or it didn't connect here, the road didn't go there. So we take all of that into consideration. We look at that, and then ultimately we develop our comments, which go back toward whomever is developing the proposal, and we ask them to either address that or mitigate that. And then ultimately that steps off through the process in the Department of Land and Resource Management. It's all part of the approval process, originally goes back. But our number one concern is for you, our bosses, who are our taxpayers, and we look to say what we can do to best meet those needs. And we try to also make sure that we're working within the development community to get them to address that before that community goes in. So that's how we work with that.
Now, one other question. So if this project goes ahead, it looks like it's moving, and you're still in the preliminary phase, I guess we're calling. That decision could be made at the time the project is finally approved, or would that be years later, once the community's in place, and then you go, oh, we made a mistake, we need a driveway?
We're going to make our best decisions trying to push it out forward. You know, the fact is, paper streets have been mentioned, but historically, you can go back and look at a lot of maps and paper streets set on there, but they often do not get constructed because there sometimes becomes a lack of funding. Many years later, when the time comes to construct a paper street, you may not have the funding in to make that happen and make that transition. So we do try to forecast out. We don't do it in a silo. We reach out to all other partners within the county and elsewhere, frankly, to see how things work. And one of our biggest partners around this area, and we do it on a number of developments, is how connecting of anything else will directly impact, for example, state roads. If we open this road, where will it take traffic to? How will it impact any of the other state roads, and how can people ultimately find safe travel around? So we look at all those things, sir. Yes, sir.
Please.
number 55 an older portion of this?
On this, no,
No,
but I'm going to show you one
In
in
a
a
second. So, yes, sir.
Just a real quick question. When you're looking at the traffic study in Marysville too, I'm sure most of this traffic is going to head to Howard County. Did you look at Howard County, Marysville portion through Howard County? Or is the requirement of the developer to look at that?
So the connection between Marysville and Marysville.
We have not looked out into Howard County in terms of Marysville Road. It's really about intersections, and the county looks at it and says, kind of identifies all the intersections they want to make sure that we're looking at in the study. Those are all Carroll County intersections.
But honestly, there's a reality there.
We're not talking very far away, and I know. And a whole lot of deer like to jump over onto Marysville too. So maybe they're going to Marysville, I don't know. I know. I've been there, done that, hit a deer, been there, done that, so. Yeah, I know. And it's very narrow, and the culverts are very deep. That's why my concern, and I've talked a lot to the developer about this, is the capacity of Marysville too, and the concerns there. And the intersection between Ridge Road and Marysville too. But, yes, ma'am.
Where are you going to put all the kids in the 143 homes?
They're all going to Freedom. No, I'm kidding.
Carrolltown, I think.
Yes, they feed into Carroll. That's right. They feed into Carrolltown. All these homes are not being built overnight. How many homes are being built at any given year? Is it 25?
I mean, that's, so the permit requirement, and the permit restriction in Carroll County is 25 permits per year. So you have a kind of self-imposed build out of a project like this over several years to begin with. And then as been alluding to, that we don't get to proceed forward to final plans until this has been looked at and analyzed, and people were comfortable with the solution and the build out and the timing in relation to where the facilities are.
Yeah, and the fact is, we can't look at this in isolation. This has got to tie to the schools, you're exactly right, and to fire EMS and to infrastructure. But we put the process in place where we're only building 25 a year, so the impact on the schools is not going to be over dramatic that it could be. So, but yes, sir.
Is that 25 per year per development or total?
Per
Per development, yeah.
Development.
Per development, right. So what we're talking about here is up in this area. We're going to talk about Beatty in a second. And that could be up to 25, and that would feed into Freedom. The Hobie Wolf is another 20. That you're absolutely right.
This doesn't add up. I mean, you
Well, no, it unfortunately it adds
all
up.
I'm hearing is, you can't get any more money, you can't raise any taxes, you're not gonna have any more revenue. You're gonna keep building, they're only redistricting, they're only busing the kids, basically. That's all I'm hearing, long-term planning.
So
Is that true?
no.
How far would you bus a kid? Would you go from Eldersburg up to Manchester? Like, what, is it the whole county that needs to be redistricted? Is that the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about yet? You won't build anything new for the schools.
That is
And you keep pushing more holes in here.
that is the elephant in the room. Is looking at how redistricting is necessary to look at the entire county. Absolutely, I agree with you. Developments will not be built on unless the criteria is met. So homes will not be built if Carrolltown cannot absorb those 25 homes. They will not be built. They're allowed to be built and they're zoned to be built, and the developer has the property to build them, but they will not be built until the capacity allows them to be built. We have a certain amount of time, 6 years? 5?
It's not real clear.
But-
We have an adequate public
So
facilities ordinance
similar
that prevents
to
us
the impact,
from
you know.
allowing development to move forward if there is capacity, as Commissioner Rothstein said, in those areas, higher EMS schools, et cetera. So we
Yeah.
can hold up the development for a
Right.
period of time.
And then as far as taxes, again, I'm not saying we're going to raise taxes, but I'm not saying we're not going to. I cannot make that decision. That's where me and my colleagues will work starting 2023 on how taxes could be used and what taxes could be used for. But that may be part of a solution, you know, to meet these type of needs. So it's not one, that's the biggest challenge that we have when we do these things is we look at things in isolation, and we've got to put it all together. Is how does this impact Ridge Road intersection with Marysville 2? How's Marysville 2 impact going into Marysville into Howard County? How does the elementary schools get affected? Professionalizing the fire EMS, how are we filling those positions? You know, down in the Freedom Firehouse, in the Sykesville Firehouse, it all comes together. And, you know, it's where does revenue come from? Is taxes appropriate to meet these needs? If it is, then we're going to make sure that that happens. If it's not, then what's going to come off the table? What discretionary dollars can come off, and what decisions, and they're going to be hard, because somebody's priority, you know, it could be agricultural preservation, you know, which we have none here in the Freedom District, but meanwhile, we apply money towards ag preservation. Should that then be reallocated to schools or something else? I'm not going to stand here and say that's what's going to happen, but that's going to be on the table as well, and we're going to have that conversation. So, but I mean, it's great concerns, great questions, but I'm not going to run away from it. And you're right, the elephant in the room is how do we ensure that our students are getting the best education here in Carroll County with the growth. You could say where Ted was an anomaly, but growth in the southern part of the county. But how is it going to meet all the needs of the entire county? That's kind of where we're at. Go ahead, sir.
So go back to the timing for a minute. Is your county, is it a policy that in fact 25 permits per development?
Yes.
Happens at one per year? Or how does it work? What's-
Per development, you have 25 units that can be built.
Per year.
Per year, yes.
Okay, so just doing the rough
Yeah.
math, a little bit less than 150. So if this is approved, and at the time you begin, you pull the first 25 permits for your first units, and then 25 years subsequently over the number, so about 6 years from start to finish.
That's correct.
Assuming
Right,
all-
roughly, yes.
Assuming nothing changes within all.
Roughly. That's correct.
And any estimate of time, and I'm sorry for you to guess, what year this might start?
I mean, this is still a couple of years out from where we stand at concept plan, needing to go to preliminary plan, needing to go to final plan.
And permit.
Yeah, I mean, this
Right.
is greater than 24 months is where I'd say we stand at this point.
If it was up to him, it'd be tomorrow, but it's not, because it took a long time just to get to here, because it was a much higher density, is what they wanted, they being the developer along with the property owner at the time. And we had very hard discussions to get it to where it is today, which is much less density, and understanding it still has to go through these, I don't want to say wickets, whatever stages, but it's not an overnight process. And you're absolutely right. We're talking 2-3 years down the road before any permits are going to be granted. But we've got to be looking down there on redistricting and other ways to meet the needs for our students. I mean, it all works together, but it's not an overnight process. 1 second, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Does the county, what is the smallest lot size in development like this? Do we have a minimum?
7,500. Which is a quarter acre? The smallest lot size, quarter acre, is a quarter acre. It goes from quarter acre up to a full acre. Yeah, I mean, typically.
So the smallest?
Yeah, is a quarter acre.
That's not our zoning
No,
here.
that's not.
Ours is R40,000, which allows you to cluster to the 20,000 square feet.
So half acre. So basically half acre is the smallest, up to some of the larger, which are acre lots. And we're going to talk about some more lots in a minute about
They'll have some
lot
other
size.
size lots on this.
So, but they wanted more, and we got them down. So, it's, it's a challenge, because we want to do what's right for the community, but part of the community are the people that own the property. And I want to do what's right for the property owner. So if the property owner has a piece of property and it's specifically zoned a certain way, and then we go in and say, well, okay, you're selling your piece of property, but now you're going to sell your piece of property and we're going to ensure you rezone it for less than what you could have sold it for prior. So in other words, instead of having 50 lots, we're saying, no, you can't sell it for 50 lots. Now you can only sell it for 30 lots. That property owner has specific rights that they should own up to, that they should have. I believe in that, but the community also has certain rights as well, and we got to work together. It is a challenging situation. This was one of those very significant challenges, where the property owner wanted to do certain things, sell it to the developer with a very strong plan, and then the county came in and said, we understand that. We understand the property owner's needs and requirements and wants, but the community has a say as well, and we want to look at it this way. An agreement was made. So it's much less of a capacity than before. So but again, that's because of your input collectively. Yes, sir.
The last time you were here, you were telling us that Georgetown Boulevard, they were putting in a whole set of houses. And what about that? That's going to impact all the schools also. Or are you planning on putting a second level on the elementary schools so we have more?
Right. We're going to get into, where'd he go? Oh, there he is. We're going to get into Georgetown let's segue right into that now and we can talk. Go away for a sec. So a couple things happening with Georgetown, and you can put that up. The first step is there's a couple roads in the southern part of the county that were determined not satisfactory for the amount of vehicles on the roads. Georgetown being one of them. So Georgetown, where am I looking? Right here is that hairpin turn, which really stinks, okay? I mean, it's dangerous. So it was determined to put a circle on that, where that hairpin turn is. Where that hairpin turn now is a circle feeds into what's called now the Beatty property. So just to orient you, you got 26 on the bottom, you got 32 on the left side or going south to north. You've got the post office right over here. So you got 32 in progress. You got Merritt buildings here and Merritt Gym. People know Merritt Gym. So you got progress, and progress stops right here as a dead end, okay? And then feeds into, again, what's called the Beatty property. On the north side, Bennett Road crosses 32 to Johnsville, okay? And there's a light, and a lot of work was done by State Highway to clean up that area. Now on Bennett, you have large properties that are 1 to 3 acre properties. So now, again, how to conform to the community needs, but also have the property owner have their rights in selling this property and the developer or the buyer getting the most out of the property. St. John came in and said, we can do this. But they also own Liberty Exchange. So this is their second property here in Carroll County. And it's a mixed-use property between residential, that Tom will talk about in a second, along with industrial up here. And somebody was talking about over 55, that's what these are up here. And I've been to their over 55 units in somewhere else, and they're beautiful, up in Baltimore County. But that's over 55, and on the north part, to conform to the north side of Bennett, those are 1 acre lots on the top.
The over 55, so they can get the permit to build those houses, and those houses could have kids in them that need to go to school. Yes.
They could have kids in them that have the needs to go to school.
So even though their permits will be approved, there's still the possibility of having more children entering into the school system.
There is a possibility for folks that are over 55 that have kids that need to go to school. I would expect those that are over 55 with kids going to school, there may be some with young kids, but most of them would be in high school, but I'm not the one to say, but you're right. There is that potential. But what I wanted to do was hand it off to Tom just to share what he's done so far as the traffic study and understanding the capacity in this property. So, Tom.
Good morning. For anyone that was here last time, Tom Peel on the St. John Properties. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm Tom Peel on the St. John Properties. I'm in charge of our development group, and really what I do is we oversee the design and the permitting of our projects. We go through the process. This is the very similar plan to what we brought. It was in March that we were here the last time. It's a very similar plan. There's a couple of minor changes that I'll point out to you. But as far as what they call the building program, or what's intended to be built, it's essentially the same program. It's 107 1-acre lots to the north, 149 townhome units that would be in a condo regime. Those are the 55+ units, or they call retirement village, and then 34 single-family lots to the south. These are 1-acre lots, and these are clustered 1/4-acre lots. The two kind of significant changes, if you want to call it that, the plan that we had during the spring was proposing to connect over to Cedar Court. There's a wetland in this area here, so we're proposing to end that with a cul-de-sac and make the connection to Georgetown, the connections into the existing community to the south. And then think the plan we had here previously showed us coming up into a T intersection. And with some feedback from the county, they asked us to look at that under a couple of different scenarios. And we decided to go with a roundabout similar to what's being proposed down here at the Georgetown, London Town. It's currently the bend. That'll be a circle. But the plan is Georgetown Boulevard extends up through, Progress Way extends over, the two connect, and then this is a future project that the county is planning for. It's not part of the development as such. So as a result, the residential to the north would distribute out to Bennett Road. The industrial immediately would go to Progress Way and out to 32. And then in the future, that would go also go Georgetown to 26 and also over to 32. And then the new residential to the south would be connecting to Georgetown Boulevard as well as connecting to the existing Longmeadow. So number of units is unchanged. The square footage here, I think is slightly different, but we're right at about 300,000 square feet of what we call flexible units.
That's big enough for tractor trailers to go in and out?
Yes, yeah.
Now, I was at another meeting, and they told me on Johnsville Road, just on the other side of Liberty Road, they're gonna build 126 condominiums on the corner of Johnsville and Piney Ridge Parkway.
Okay, so what, yeah, what,
And again, they said 55 and older, and I'm again looking at 4 kids.
okay, so, two things. Now, Lance, you had the second one in a second, but going on to Progress for industrial is important. Working with State Highway and NDOT is happening right now on how that's going to feed into 32 because of that that concern of large vehicles coming down Progress. So yes, that's also happening. As far as the property on Johnsville and Piney, it was sold. It used to be the Salerno's property. It was decided finally to sell. I think J.P. Baldick bought it from Howard County, and it is in over 55, and I think it's about 50 some odd units. 100, okay. I haven't talked to him in a while. Of over 55. And same answer, yes, there could be kids in the over 55 communities. You know, the expectation, it'll be much less than greater, but, you know, we don't know. But it is over 55. And it is, key to it, it's zoned to allow for that property to be used that way. They were looking at lots of different options on how to use that gas station, liquor store, catering, lots of different ideas. And it was finally sold about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and that's what it's purchased for. I happen to know that more, better understand because I live around the corner from that and Piney, so.
So as far as status, where we are versus where we were when we came in the spring, or the winter, whichever it was, we had not made any submittals to the county at that point. Actually, I think we had submitted a traffic study to the county. We got some feedback from the county on that. We ended up going back and redoing our counts and resubmitting our traffic study, which is under review at the county right now. And now we're preparing, at the end of this month, we're going to be submitting what's called a grading only plan. We are in due diligence, which means we're studying the property. We haven't committed to purchasing the property yet. And there were a couple questions that we still wanted to try to get answered. What's the alignment of Georgetown Boulevard as it goes up and connects? What's the width of it? What are the access points? Things like that. And as it relates to the overall project, the traffic study for the site, is it technically correct? And we have some understanding with the county as to if there's any mitigation required, what that mitigation would look like. So we have an understanding, economically, whether the project makes sense or not. So we have an engineer on board that has done what's called a 30% design on the alignment of Georgetown Boulevard as well as Progress Way. We submit that at the end of the month along with a traffic study, floodplain study, forest conservation, forest stand delineation, the basic things that are required to go along with that plan. And then when we get feedback from the county on that, we'll make our decision as to whether or not we want to go forward with the project. And again, with the traffic study, we'll get the feedback on that it's technically correct, and they deem it completely, conformity with the plan that we're proposing. We'll have the conversation about whether there's implementation requirements or not.
Assuming the project goes forward and gets approved, will you be phasing it? And if you do, how do you see the phasing happen?
Yes, so the answer is yes, we'll be phasing it. The 25 units per year that was talked about earlier will be part of that. The property will basically get processed as 4 different projects. The single-family residential units to the north. The retirement village requires an additional approval, so we'll be going in and getting that, they call conditional approval in place first, and then we'll process the plans associated with that. The southern residential, but the first thing we're going to be processing, we'll process that the San Diego subdivision. And then the industrial district is where we're going to put our focus first. So as soon as we get comfortable that the county's good with what we're proposing, as far as the alignment of the road, and we understand the traffic implications, we're going to submit plans for the industrial district itself. Kind of as far as number of years, kind of build out, it's a total guess, but we assume our traffic study assumes this will happen over several years as it's building out. So maybe we'll start construction in 2024 and finish out 2029, 2023, something like that. I'm sorry, 2030 rather. So it's a little ways out.
Quick question, what's the difference in the dark green and the regular green? Is that wetlands?
So the dark green is forested to remain, and then the light green are wetland areas that will remain as well.
Yes, ma'am.
What's going to happen with the water and the sewer?
Go ahead for this.
So there's an
Yeah.
existing sewer line that runs through the site, and we'll connect to that, and the water lines will be extended through the property from where they currently stub out.
Yes, and currently, the properties that are being developed now are on water and sewer. So it's within the plan that the water and sewer exist for both the Zabel and this property, so. Okay. It's after 12, I told you I'm gonna go to the quality of the questions and tasks. What I do wanna share with you, and not just time, this is, besides a chip holder, it's a number 988. I don't know if you've heard of 988. You've heard of 911. 911 is used for emergencies. 988 is used if someone feels that they are thinking of harming themselves or others, and or you know of someone that is thinking of harming themselves. What it does is it puts the person directly in contact with somebody qualified in the mental health in that community. So I dial from 434, whatever our zip is here, or area code. It will bring me to somebody in the mental health department in this community, and not to a 911, which would be state police, to Carroll County Sheriff's Department, to somebody else. It's just another tool to keep our community healthy. It is a national program. So in all honesty, if I'm up in, Jersey somewhere and I call this, it's gonna, because of my area code, it will bring me to somebody down here. But it is another way of keeping our community safe. So the county has really bought into this. I just want to share that with you. Up here are some of the sheets of what we talked about. Impact fees, zoning process, and the numbers of the community at large here in Carroll County. Feel free, you want to come up and take a flyer or take whatever you want, some of these. Okay? Thanks.